The screams echoed through the ancient valley as blood-stained hands gripped a jagged stone. In the flickering shadows of dying firelight, a family torn apart by hunger and desperation faced the ultimate choice. Brother against brother. Mother against child. 6.4 million years ago, when survival meant crossing lines that should never be crossed. When the thin thread of humanity was tested by the cruelest master of all, starvation. Tonight, we journey back to a time when killing your own blood wasn't murder, it was evolution. The darkness that lives within us all began here, in the most desperate moment of our ancient past. What you're about to witness changed the course of human history forever. The acrid smell of smoke, mixed with rotting flesh, hung heavy in the humid air as dawn broke over the primordial landscape. She was a female Homo habilis named Kira, her weathered hands trembling as she clutched the lifeless body of her youngest child against her chest. The drought had lasted 7 moons now. 7 endless cycles of watching the great river shrink to nothing more than cracked mud, and scattered bones of creatures that had come seeking water only to find death. The once lush forests that had provided fruits, roots, and shelter had withered into skeletal remains, their branches reaching toward an unforgiving sky like the arms of the dying. Kira's tribe had dwindled from 30 to just 8 souls. Her mate, Grun, sat motionless by the dying embers of their fire, his hollow eyes fixed on something only he could see. Their surviving children, Mora, barely old enough to hunt, and little Jack, whose ribs now showed through his thin skin, huddled together in the meager shade of a dead tree. Mother, Mora's voice cracked like dry bark. The child, is she? Kira nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. The baby had been sick for days, her tiny body racked with fever and convulsions. Now she was still, terribly still, in her mother's arms. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant cry of scavenger birds circling overhead. They knew. They always knew when death had visited. Grun finally stirred, his gaunt frame rising with difficulty. "We cannot stay here," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "The others, they left yesterday. Went north, searching for the green lands our ancestors spoke of." But Kira knew the truth that Grun refused to speak. They were too weak to travel, too weak to hunt, too weak to do anything but wait for death to claim them all. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desolate landscape in shades of amber and rust, something stirred in the distance. A figure approached through the heat haze. Brock, Grun's younger brother, who had left with the other survivors just 2 days ago. He was alone, and he was carrying something that would change everything. Brock stumbled into their meager camp, his body scarred and bloodied, clutching a leather pouch that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The stench that followed him was unmistakable, the sweet, cloying smell of fresh meat. "Brother," Grun whispered, struggling to his feet. "The others, where are the others?" Brack's eyes darted between the dying fire and his family, never settling on any one face for long. His hand shook as he set down the pouch, and Kira noticed the dark stains beneath his fingernails, stains that were still wet. "Gone," Brock muttered, his voice hollow. "All gone. The journey north, it was a trap. No water, no food, just endless sun and death." Little Jack crawled closer, his small nose twitching at the scent emanating from the pouch. "Uncle Brock," he whispered, "what's in the bag?" The silence stretched like a taut vine, ready to snap. Brack's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breathing shallow and quick. When he finally spoke, his words came in broken fragments. Found Roki by the dried riverbed. He had fallen, broken leg, the bone." Brack's voice trailed off as he touched his own thigh, white bones sticking through the skin. The flies had already found him. Kira felt her stomach lurch. Roki was their nephew, Brack's own son, just 16 seasons old, with eyes that still held the spark of youth despite the harsh world they lived in. Is he? Mora began to ask, but the question died on her lips as Brack's expression told her everything she needed to know. He begged me, Brock continued, his voice breaking. Begged me to ... to not let it go to waste. Said his death should mean something, should help his family live another day. The leather pouch seemed to grow larger in the flickering light, its contents calling to their starving bodies, even as their minds recoiled in horror. Grun stepped forward, his hands reaching toward the pouch before stopping midair. Brother, you cannot mean ... We are dying. Brock screamed suddenly, the sound echoing off the barren hills around them. Look at us. Look at what we've become. Jack can barely stand. The baby is dead. How long before we all follow? The truth hung in the air like a physical presence, pressing down on them all. They had perhaps days left, maybe less. And here, in this cursed pouch, was their salvation, their damnation. The choice that would haunt humanity forever was about to be made. As night fell over the wasteland, the family sat in a circle around the leather pouch, none daring to touch it, all unable to look away. The fire cast dancing shadows on their faces, transforming their hollow features into masks of anguish and desperation. Kira still held her dead infant, rocking gently back and forth as if the motion could somehow bring life back to the tiny form. But her eyes were fixed on the pouch with a hunger that terrified her. Tell us what happened, Grun said finally, his voice barely audible above the crackling flames. Tell us everything. Brack's hands clenched and unclenched as he began to speak, his words painting a picture more horrifying than any nightmare. We had been walking for 2 days when Roki stepped wrong. The ground ... it gave way beneath him. Ancient riverbank, soft as ash. He fell into a deep channel, and when I climbed down to help in ... double quotes, he paused, his breathing ragged. The bone in his leg had snapped clean through. The blood. There was so much blood. I tried to stop it, tried to bind the wound, but it was too late. He grew cold so quickly. Mora wrapped her arms around little Jack, pulling him close as Brock continued his terrible tale. Before he died, he grabbed my hand. Uncle, he said, don't let the scavengers have me. Don't let my death be meaningless. And I promised him. I promised I would bring him home. The wind howled through the dead trees, carrying with it the sound of distant thunder, but no promise of rain. Only the threat of another storm to wash away what little shelter they had left. I used the sharp stones, Brock whispered, his voice now so quiet they had to lean in to hear him. Cut away the parts the scavengers hadn't found yet. Wrapped them in his own clothing. I told myself ... I told myself he would have wanted this, that he would have understood. Jack began to whimper softly, and Kira realized the child understood more than she had hoped. The innocence of youth was dying along with everything else in this cursed land. Grun reached out slowly, his trembling fingers hovering over the pouch's leather ties. If we do this, he said, his voice thick with emotion, if we cross this line, what does that make us? Alive, Brock answered without hesitation. It makes us alive. The thunder grew closer, and with it came the first drops of rain. Not enough to save them, but enough to wash away the tears that had begun to fall from their desperate eyes. The moment of decision had arrived. The first bite was the hardest. Grun's teeth tore through the flesh while tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. Each chew a betrayal of everything he had believed about right and wrong. But as the nutrients hit his starving system, his body betrayed his conscience with desperate gratitude. One by one, they all partook. Even Mora, barely more than a child herself, consumed the forbidden sustenance while clutching Jack to her chest. The only sound was the wet noise of eating and the soft patter of rain on dead leaves. Kira set aside her deceased infant long enough to join them, her movements mechanical, almost ritualistic. With each piece she consumed, she felt something fundamental shift inside her, not just physically, but spiritually. They were crossing into territory from which there could be no return. "Forgive us, Roki," Brock whispered between bites. "Forgive us all." As the night wore on and their bellies filled for the first time in weeks, an unnatural strength began to flow through their veins. Jack's color improved dramatically, his breathing becoming stronger and more regular. Mora's eyes regained some of their lost spark. Even Grun seemed to stand a little taller. But with the physical restoration came something else, a darkness that settled over the camp like a living thing. They had taken the ultimate step, consumed the flesh of their own blood, and in doing so had awakened something primal and terrifying within themselves. "We cannot speak of this to anyone," Grun said finally, his voice carrying a new authority. "What happened here? It dies with us." But as he spoke these words, a sound echoed from the darkness beyond their fire. The crack of a branch, the soft shuffle of feet on stone. Someone was out there. Someone had been watching. Brock leaped to his feet, grabbing a sharp stone. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice carrying a new aggression that hadn't been there before. "Show yourself." From the shadows emerged a figure they all recognized, Nala, an elder from their tribe who had been too weak to make the journey north. Her ancient eyes took in the scene before her, the leather pouch, the remnants of their meal, the guilty expressions on their faces. "I see what you have become," she said, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "I see what hunger has made of you." The family froze, caught in their moment of ultimate shame. But Nala's next words would shock them more than any condemnation, and I understand why. She stepped closer to the fire, her skeletal frame casting long shadows. "Because I too have eaten the flesh of the dead. Because I too have crossed the line that separates us from the beasts. The question now is, what do we do next?" The rain began to fall harder, washing the blood from their hands, but never from their souls. Nala's revelation shattered the last vestiges of their moral certainty. The elder settled beside their fire, her ancient bones creaking like old wood, and began to speak of truths that had been hidden for generations. "In the great drought of my youth, when I was no older than Mora is now, my own family faced this choice. My grandmother... she was the first to suggest it. Better to live with shame, she said, than to die with pride." The rain intensified, turning the ground around them into a muddy soup that reflected the firelight like pools of blood. Kira hugged her dead infant closer, as if trying to shield the tiny corpse from hearing these terrible confessions. "But it changes you," Nala continued, her weathered fingers tracing patterns in the mud. "Once you taste the flesh of your own kind, something awakens inside you. A hunger that never truly goes away. A knowledge that you are capable of things you never imagined." Jack whimpered and buried his face against Mora's shoulder. The child was too young to fully understand the implications of what they had done, but old enough to sense the wrongness that now permeated their very existence. "There are others," Nala whispered, leaning closer to the fire. "Others who have made this choice. They gather in the deep caves to the east, away from the judgment of those who have never faced true starvation. They call themselves the Forgotten Tribe." Brack's eyes lit up with a desperate hope. "Others? There are others like us?" "Oh, yes," Nala nodded gravely. "But be warned, they are no longer entirely human. The first taste leads to the second, and the second to the third. Soon, they begin to prefer the flesh of their own kind to any other sustenance. They hunt not just animals, but each other." A chill ran down Grun's spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. "You're saying we're doomed to become ... monsters?" "Not doomed," Nala corrected, "but changed. Forever changed. The choice now is whether you embrace what you've become, or fight against it until your dying day." Thunder crashed overhead, so close it made them all flinch. In that moment of brilliant lightning, they saw something that made their blood freeze. Shapes moving in the darkness beyond their camp. Tall, gaunt figures with eyes that reflected the firelight like those of wild animals. The Forgotten Tribe, had found them, and they were hungry. The creatures that emerged from the storm-lashed darkness barely resembled the humans they had once been. Their limbs were elongated and twisted, their teeth filed to sharp points, their eyes sunken deep into skull-like faces painted with ritual scars. They moved with predatory grace, circling the small camp like wolves surrounding wounded prey. "Fresh meat," one of them hissed, its voice barely recognizable as human speech. "Sweet, tender flesh that still remembers innocence." Nala stood slowly, showing no fear as she faced the monsters. "These are under my protection," she declared with surprising authority. "They have eaten of the forbidden fruit, but they are still new to the change." The leader of the forgotten tribe, a towering figure whose body was covered in ritual scars and bone ornaments, laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Old woman, you have no power here. We smell the blood on their hands. We taste their guilt in the air. They belong to us now." But Grun surprised everyone, including himself, by standing and facing the creatures with newfound courage. The strength he had gained from his forbidden meal coursed through his veins, and with it came a fierce protectiveness he had never experienced before. "We are not like you," he snarled, brandishing the sharp stone he had used to prepare Roki's flesh. "We chose survival, not savagery." The confrontation that followed was brief but brutal. The forgotten tribe attacked with animal ferocity, but the family fought back with desperation born of love and loss. In the end, it was little Jack who turned the tide, his small hands finding a burning branch from the fire and swinging it at the creature's eyes with surprising strength. The monsters retreated into the storm, their inhuman howls mixing with the thunder. But their parting words would haunt the family forever. "You cannot fight what you are becoming. We will be waiting when the hunger takes hold again." As dawn broke over the devastated landscape, the family stood together in the aftermath of their first real battle. They were changed, not just by what they had eaten, but by what they had become capable of when pushed to their limits. "What happens now?" Mora asked, her young voice carrying a new hardness that spoke of innocence lost. Kira looked down at her dead infant one last time before gently laying the tiny body to rest beneath a cairn of stones. When she stood, her eyes held a terrible resolve. "Now we survive," she said simply. "We find others like us, those who have faced the choice and chosen to remain human despite it all. We build something new from the ashes of what we were." Nala smiled for the first time since arriving at their camp. "There is a place," she said, "far to the west, beyond the great mountains. A valley where the green still grows, where those who carry the burden of terrible choices can find redemption." As they gathered their meager possessions and prepared to begin the long journey toward hope, none of them noticed the small changes already beginning to manifest in their bodies. The slightly sharper teeth, the enhanced night vision, the way their fingernails had begun to harden into claw-like points. The choice they had made to survive would echo through the millennia, becoming part of humanity's darkest legacy. But in that moment, walking away from their camp as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they were still a family, still human, still fighting to remain so. The real battle had only just begun.